listening to WPVM FM at 103.7 Asheville, North Carolina. You can also listen online at WPVM.org. This program is sponsored in part by MAHEC, the Mountain Area Health Education Center located here in Asheville, and we're grateful for their support. I'm Greg Lathrop, and you're listening to Third Messenger Radio Hour, offering Asheville unique coverage, a global perspective on the culture of being with dying. Our segments include interviews, music, round-the-world coverage, and an ear on the conversation of the art of being with dying. Your future awaits. Our quest begins with a discussion with Zoe Allison Rockingbear. So the best way I know to begin that, Zoe, is to ask, who is Zoe?
I would have to say that I am a woman of the Americas.
Tell me about that.
Personally, I see my work as an elder in the community and as an artist incorporating life's mysteries in my paintings, that I've not only been changed by these, but in realizing that each of us are coming to sacred places and working with being in ceremony with one another, that our lives have been enriched. I've had the opportunity to be in Mexico, here in the United States and South America, and being in a position to lead ceremonies as well.
Mm-hmm. I understand that when you came to these mountains here in the Asheville area, actually in Burnsville, that when you came here, you had a vision about a lodge that I know to be called Earth Green Medicine Lodge. Tell me about that.
Well, I was given the name by what I would call Creator, to have a place called Earth Green Medicine Lodge. And in that place, we have been able to gather people together to come to take part in ceremony and to lead their lives in a way that they can become closer to what Spirit might be saying to them about living and ultimately their dying.
Yes, I've experienced that some in my life as well, and I hear what you're saying, but it'd be good probably to talk a little bit more about especially with Third Messenger's goal of cultivating the art, even the sacred art of being with dying. How do you see this thing we call sacred ceremony being a part of that? What is sacred ceremony, or who is sacred ceremony? How do you see that?
Well, I would say that the difference between just living your life in an everyday way, we can pretty much pay our rent, go to the bank, catch a ride, stay in school, and you can do those things half asleep. But when you look at what your life can possibly be, the animals become sacred animals, your food becomes for the use of your ceremony as your life.
Well, it sounds like being present to what's in front of you, or paying attention to what is already a part of the living experience. But what I'm hearing you say is sacredness is really holding it in that way that you, well, I don't know, is it that you recognize it and you're aware of it and you move from there?
I think the commonality of all of us being in right relations, I would call it, is to live your life in a sacred way, so that anything that you touch, anything that you are part of, gets to be part of that living in a sacred life. When I paint as an artist, when I paint or choose a color, for me, every bit of that work is to work with a divine being. The palette of the sky and its colors, you can take with you to move into another world or realm. Not only for your contemplation, but what happens to you when you die? When is the paint done? It's good to ask a question, to ask a person who is dying, or any of us, what is their perspective of what will lead your life to be enriched by the experience of living here? None of us have died before, so this is new ground and needs to be considered. It's a natural question for all of us.
In some of your teachings, I've heard you teach related to that preparation for death, and that preparation for death is a daily ritual of gratitude, is something I've heard you say. What would you have to elaborate on that?
I would say that the observation and the unique blessings that come our way by taking the opportunity to see a vision or to have a vision for your own death or life, that this is done as not just as a recreational pursuit, but as a container for yourself, your life, your community. Americans have been doing ceremonies since the beginning of time, as I know it, like, for example, the Vision Quest.
So, the Vision Quest, this is something that you and I both know about in our walk together. And I'd like to talk about that some more, because I see it in my life as something that is very helpful in finding the beauty of living. However, when you try to describe that to some people, they sort of have related to me as I think that cheese is slid off of Greg's cracker in the way that he goes out and puts himself in a situation that's certainly not comfortable. Certainly it's not something that is considered normal. I've certainly felt that in my life, but this Vision Quest, this, as I understand it, moving into the wilderness in many different ways, but finding that place of solitude with Creator, it's not a comfortable thing, and it's not for a short time. It's over many days often, and it involves fasting and being ready for that vision that you're calling for. So tell me some more about your experience with the Vision Quest ceremony and how it can be assisting others in the beauty of their life.
With my work with Earth Green Medicine Lodge, I've been in a place to host a Vision Quest since 1991. And this ceremony is really for people to go without the comforts of their daily life to seek a vision for their future and the roles that they might play in society and in their private life. And it is a container for friends and families to come in support of one another, to see that this is not an alone pursuit that we do. So the Vision Quest is really a form of dying to the old and seeking the new. This is an event in our life that is good to prepare for. If this is an inevitable event called death, can we make it more approachable for all of us? Like this radio show, the Death Cafes, the Third Messenger, reports from these people allow us to assist one another so that the fear factor of death goes away.
diving in, so to speak, and seeing that the opportunity for the fear to dissolve is there.
Like we also use a ceremony called the Sweat Lodge. And this is a prayerful time, a place of contemplation where we can go and let go of what no longer serves us, let go of blockages that might have come to us. And it's made more dramatic with not only the heat in the sweat lodge, but the ritual that we find ourselves with the fire, the stones, the songs that we use in ceremony. Shamans and ceremonialists have, for many, many years, used these kinds of things to help with the communities and the ceremonies and teachings of those that are coming to a realization that they will no longer be with us. So life's resources against a life of confusion can be a blessing to the people, to help them to find a place of peace and calmness, find life and death by using ceremony. So the closer we come to death, the perfect song, the music, what we want to listen to, the places that we want to visit, these are all ceremonies that we can do for one another, and I think it's really important to do that.
Yeah, yeah. In relation to that, I've heard you say that in this sacred ceremony that we could all move into a space of more compassion for others hearing their prayers and their requests made. I think that's a beautiful statement.
Well, it's so important when we go to a memorial service or a funeral for one another, if the person has been in an active role of living and living through the dying process, and it gives them an opportunity to say, look, people, look, friends, this is what I want for myself. This is what I would like to share with you as I move through this death.
Yeah, that feels very beautiful just hearing you talk about it. And as we dive into what you're describing to me is the old ways really have been teaching us for thousands of years that it's good to look at our dying, and actually the ceremonies, in my experience, are literally dying ceremonies, that there is an element of letting go of that which no longer serves us and being reborn. You mentioned the Vision Quest. Certainly that you elaborated on that being a dying ceremony. We go to the mountain and we literally are dying to that part of us that's no longer needed. The sweat lodge, we go into the sweat lodge. We exit from the sweat lodge. I've heard the term rebirth. We come out again new. So that means that at some level we are willing to address this thing that we might call the fear of death. So that fear of death, and one thing you wrote at one point about the fear of death is you said, I think it mostly boils down to the fear that we will no longer exist. How would you elaborate on that?
And really, when you think of that idea that we would no longer exist, I would say, well, why would that even occur to you? Someone out there is going to call your name. You've been called daddy, sweet mama, hey there. The extension of your life, whether you've been on your best behavior or not, is did you live up to your potential? What do you want to extend beyond the life that you are in now?
You also have said before that moving into the death ritual for you is really living and moving into the sacredness of all of life's being.
It is a gratitude to be a sacred human being. And it gives us the opportunity to look at not just being a human, whether your life has been a delight or riddled with the insanity of hurt and despair, which I have to say many are going through or choosing to stay in, recreating almost daily an altar for the Day of the Dead. During that Day of the Dead ceremony, which we celebrate once a year, the ceremonies are done for the ones that we long for, the ones that have already gone, their life, the mystical part of their life, their bad habits and all. So I think it's important that we might even consider how we might create a Day of the Dead altar for ourselves or our friends. Our ancestors are going to help us. Your favorite symbols from this world that you're going to miss. It can be simple or complex, but I think it's a good idea to maybe have a Day of the Dead altar for yourself.
Well, it's good that you mentioned that, because when my wife died in 2013, unexpectedly, the altar that was created literally in my home has been very healing. It's been very helpful. It's just part of that you just mentioned in relation to the Day of the Dead altar. One thing I notice in this part of the world, and in North America anyway, is that there is confusion sometimes that I hear with people. They liken it to Halloween because it's at the same time of the year, but certainly in the culture of Mexico and beyond that, where they celebrate the Day of the Dead, it's a different tone, isn't it?
It is a different tone. I remember being in Mexico and assisting with a family for a Day of the Dead altar, and I had one thing there which probably looked a little too Halloween. Maybe it was orange and black. I don't remember what it was, but I was told I could not use that on that altar at all.
Oh, yeah. So very aware of the difference they were.
Very aware of the difference.
Yeah. So the Day of the Dead is really, whereas Halloween in this part of the world is to scare away the spirits, I guess in a broad sense, whereas Day of the Dead is actually welcoming the ancestors. Is that right?
And their life and how they lived their life. As I said before, bad habits or not. When we look at the possibilities of calling in those that have already crossed over, it's important to have symbols, have some things that they would have really, really enjoyed.
Yeah. So they're inviting them in with their favorite cigars and their favorite tequila or beer or whatever, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Let's take a musical break, and we'll be back with Zoe Allison Rockingbear. That song is entitled Breath of Snow, recently recorded by a local group here in Asheville known as Akteshna Anna. You can find them on bandcamp.com. Let's continue with Zoe Allison Rockingbear. The altar, to me, certainly leads into another part of yourself that I wanted to talk about, and that is, an altar is a bit of design work, and it's a bit of creating that which represents the ones that we want to honor. I know you went to school in interior design and architecture. Tell me how that fits in.
Well, I honestly have to say that so much of our work as designers is catering to perhaps just looking at what color or shape the couch is. We're all caught up in understanding of how the client is the center of the universe, and we're only there to play bit parts. But however, the house always changes, the couch always changes, but you as a sacred human being are telling the story. Mm-hmm. This, of course, is based upon the fact that you are choosing your own death, as I see it. Mm-hmm. Just like I believe you choose your own parents. Our society is so fearful of the death ritual, it barely lets that happen. We don't talk about it or what we intend to do about it or what we will call to ourselves. We deliberately refrain other people's to make their choices along the way. To me, it would be much more constructive, and I would encourage others by letting others to know what conscious choices that they are making for their life. How can they step out of this space and time so that what they came here to do could be changed? It's like making your own choices that you feel the most alive by looking at how you became closer to death. Rockingbear, my deceased husband, died the same year that your wife died.
Yes.
And he always said, the closer I get to death, the more alive I feel. And my thought is that wouldn't we all feel stronger and be more engaged with one another to show support for one another to live or to die? Don't you want to be in that conversation with your friends and family?
Oh, absolutely. It seems obvious to me that this is worthy of our attention. But even as an example, when we at Third Messenger were holding or trying to find space for the Death Cafe here in Asheville, there was some response from places we were looking at, like cafes or restaurants, and there was an energy at a time when it was like, why would we want to have that here? Why do we even want to talk about that? That's such a downer, you know. Why do I want to bring people into my restaurant and enter into this taboo topic, you know? So I hear that. I hear that. In relation to all that, what would you say your work has been?
Again, I would say that it's been to live my life as a sacred human being and to show others how to manifest that in their own life. This consciousness of knowing that we are special, and with every breath, and that's an important word, just the breath itself, the being able to be our own representation of living a life of sacred ceremony. Mm-hmm. That's living your death in sacred ceremony too.
Yeah. Well, in relation to that, when you're talking about that aspect of your work, do you see anything that's troubling to you? I mean, there's opportunities for us to look at this state of our culture right now. What troubles you?
What has made me so sad is seeing people with no concept of how to hold their life and their death together. They are not in their gratitude. They're after the biggest or the bluest thing. The bigger the painting is, doesn't make it better. It just makes it more time, more paint, and ultimately more ego. All things are going to drop away. I have a sign on my refrigerator that says, colors fade, canvas rots, and bronze corrodes. Life doesn't offer the people who are grasping at everything to have something more. It is a time of looking at the difference between what they have and not living in their gratitude for what their life is at this moment.
Not being here.
Not being here, exactly.
The my understanding of the Buddhist perspective of that could be called the beauty of impermanence. I think that's what you just described.
It is.
Yes. And so, Zoe, some people call you a shaman. How do you relate to that?
Well, I have to say that is some word that another person could use, but I would not use that for myself. Not being humble in a obvious way, but just allowing them to have the concept that medicine is derived from what you create for other people.
I hear that. That makes sense to me. So with that being said, I'm curious, what are your personal thoughts about dying?
Well, I would have to say my personal thoughts of dying are even in the small moments where part of the soul, part of the person, the personality of the person has not been in a position to protect it. And so by life's trauma, something that has happened to them, a part of the soul has chipped off. And so in ceremony, those parts, those pieces need to come back together so that the whole person, the sacred human being, can be prepared to see what life might be offering to them. I think, like in my father's case, I think it was so brave of him to actually take care of his death the way he wanted to. He walked out in the middle of a snowstorm, and he was looking for the trailhead. He was always a good hunter, and he wanted to know what was there for him to pick up.
Oh, that sounds beautiful. And what you're describing to me sounds like a ceremony that I know of called the soul retrieval, right? So,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So people can enter into that healing ceremony to recover those parts of themselves that may have been lost. Is that correct?
That's my understanding of it, is that as the parts that perhaps fell away or ran away because you couldn't take care of their trauma, they can be called back to themselves. So in that ceremony of a soul retrieval, they can gather the parts that will make them a whole being again, so they can be more prepared to do their life as they need to.
Yeah, I hear that. So I think in wrapping up our time together, there's one question that comes to me to bring this to an end here pretty soon, and that is, you mentioned experiencing the death of your husband and partner, Will Rockingbear, a couple of years ago. I'm curious, has anything changed in your work and your way of moving through life since his death?
Now that's a big question. I would say that my life has become more circumspect. I'm more likely to be found painting, artwork, doing that kind of work, rather than continuing to put myself in a position where people are looking to me for the answers by a ceremony that I might lead, but moving into my own ceremony of what I want to do as a sacred human being to keep myself whole.
I hear that. That's a good answer. So we've been talking with Zoe Allison Rockingbear, an elder and a teacher and an artist here in the mountains surrounding Asheville. Zoe, how can people find more information about you?
Well, I've actually stepped up into the world of Facebook. Not that I wanted to, but you can go to earthgreenmedicinelodge.com, which I have a website there. We discuss and look at different things that are coming up for the community and myself. And Zoe Allison Rockingbear on Facebook.
Okay. I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to spend this time with you. I thank you a lot for what you bring.
Thank you, Greg. You always have the good words.
You go well.
I'll go well.
You're listening to WPVM FM at 103.7 Asheville, North Carolina. You can also listen online at WPVM.org. This program is sponsored in part by MAHEC, the Mountain Area Health Education Center located here in Asheville, and we're grateful for their support. Let's listen to the title song of David Bowie's last album, which released at the time of his death. This is Black Star.
In the villa of all men, in the villa of all men, stands a solitary candle. In the center of it all, in the center of it all, you are day of execution, only women kneel and smile. At the center of it all, at the center of it all, your in the villa of all men, in the villa of all men, stands a solitary candle. At the center of it all, at the center of it all, your
I came across this personal letter to the Bowie family from a medical doctor who reflects on Bowie's contribution to his work as a physician. He goes on like this. I am a palliative care doctor, and what you have done in the time surrounding your death has had a profound effect on me and many people I work with. Your album is strewn with references, hints, and allusions. As always, you don't make interpretation all that easy, but perhaps that isn't the point. I've often heard how meticulous you were in your life. For me, the fact that your gentle death at home coincided so closely with the release of your album, with its goodbye message, in my mind, is unlikely to be a coincidence. All of this was carefully planned to become a work of death art. The video of Lazarus is very deep, and many of the scenes will mean different things to us all. For me, it's about dealing with the past when you are faced with an inevitable death. In your death at home, I can say that many people I talk to as part of my job think that death predominantly happens in hospitals and very clinical settings, but I presume you chose home and planned this in some detail. This is one of our aims in palliative care. And your ability to achieve this may mean that others will see it as an option they would like fulfilled. The photos that emerged of you some days after your death were said to be from the last weeks of your life. I do not know whether this is correct, but I am certain that many of us would like to carry off a sharp suit in the same way that you did in those photos. You looked great, as always. And it seemed in direct defiance of all the scary monsters that the last weeks of life can be associated with. You will presumably have had palliative care professionals advise on pain, nausea, vomiting, breathlessness, and I can imagine they did this well. I envisage that they also discussed any emotional anguish you may have had. The physician goes on to say, I had a discussion with a lady who recently received the news that she had advanced cancer that had spread, and that she probably would not live much longer than a year or so. She talked about you and loved your music, but for some reason, she was not impressed by your Ziggy Stardust outfit. She wasn't sure whether you were a boy or a girl. She, too, had memories of places and events for which you provided an idiosyncratic soundtrack. And then we talked about a good death, the dying moments and what these typically look like. We talked about palliative care and how it can help. She told me about her mother's and her father's death, and that she wanted to be at home when things progressed, not in a hospital or emergency room, but that she'd happily transfer to the local hospice should her symptoms be too challenging to treat at home. We both wondered who may have been around you when you took your last breath, and whether anyone was holding your hand. I believe this was an aspect of the vision she had of her own dying moments that was of utmost importance to her, and you gave her a way of expressing this most personal longing to me, a relative stranger, and I thank you.
Something happened on the day he died. Spirit rose a meter and stepped aside. Somebody else took his place and bravely cried, I'm a black star, I'm a black star. How many times does an angel fall? How many people lie instead of talking tall? He trod sacred ground, he cried loud into the crowd, I'm a black star, I'm a black star, I'm not a gangster. I can't answer why, just go with me, I'ma take you home, take your passport and shoes, your sedatives move. You're the flash in the pan. I'm the great I am. I'm a black star. I'm a black star. Way off my money, I've got game. I see right so wide, so open heart, it's pain. I want equals in my daydreams, diamonds in my eyes. Something happened on the day he died. Spirit rose a meter and stepped aside. Somebody else took his place and bravely cried, I'm a black star, I'm a star, I'm a black star. I can't answer why,
You're listening to WPVM FM at 103.7 Asheville, North Carolina. You can also listen online at WPVM.org. This program is sponsored in part by MAHEC, the Mountain Area Health Education Center located here in Asheville, and we're grateful for their support. And this is Alan Watts on the essence of dying.
Now, there really isn't anything radically wrong with being sick or with dying. Who said you're supposed to survive? Who gave you the idea that it's a gas to go on and on and on? And we can't say that it's a good thing for everything to go on living. A very simple demonstration that if we enable everybody to go on living, we overcrowd ourselves. So therefore, one person who dies in a way is honorable because he's making room for others. We can also look further into it and see that if our death could be indefinitely postponed, we would not actually go on postponing it indefinitely. Because after a certain point, we would realize that that isn't the way in which we wanted to survive. Why else would we have children? Because children arrange for us to survive in another way. By, as it were, passing on a torch, so that you don't have to carry it all the time. There comes a point where you can give it up and say, now you work. It's a far more amusing arrangement for nature to continue the process of life through different individuals than it is always with the same individual. Because as each new individual approaches life, life is renewed. And one remembers how fascinating the most ordinary everyday things are to a child. Because they see them all as marvelous, because they see them all in a way that is not related to survival and profit. When we get to thinking of everything in terms of survival and profit value, as we do, then the shapes of scratches on the floor cease to have magic. And most things, in fact, cease to have magic. So therefore, in the course of nature, once we have ceased to see magic in the world anymore, we are no longer fulfilling nature's game of being aware of itself. There's no point in it anymore. And so we die. And so something else comes to birth, which gets an entirely new view. It is not, therefore, natural for us to wish to prolong life indefinitely. But we live in a culture where it has been rubbed into us in every conceivable way that to die is a terrible thing. And that is a tremendous disease from which our culture in particular suffers.
Well, that's about it for today. This is Third Messenger Radio Hour, where we cultivate the art and being with dying, produced by Third Messenger. Our story editor is Saeed Osio, producer Jason Hebel, and I'm your announcer, Greg Lathrop. Thanks for joining us, and go well.
It's time to leave and say goodbye. at least for now. You fought the battle most of your life, and you're still fighting now. Soon you'll be leaving for the coast, but it's a ghost no man can tell. It's the end of life on this earth, and my brother, I deeply fare you well. You will always stay in my heart, as I hope I will in yours. Until that day we walk through the fields, when all of God's promises are fulfilled. Soon you'll be leaving for the coast, but it's a ghost no man can tell. It's the end of life on this earth, and my brother, I deeply fare you well.